Welcome to the hashtag R6 Prepares podcast. I'm Bill Bischoff, FEMA Region 6 Community Preparedness Officer, and we're going to be talking about community preparedness matters that affect Region 6 states and tribal nations, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, and the tribal nations therein. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the hashtag R6 Prepares podcast, and I am fortunate today to be talking with the great Rubby Douglas, a partner of longstanding of ours from Louisiana Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. Rubby, you're the Senior Chief over Preparedness, I believe, and it seems like all things because I bump into you in the hallways of higher education preparedness, of youth preparedness, of recovery. There just seems to be a lot of pots that you have to stir from your end of preparedness. So, if you will, I think we're really wanting to talk today about the good, the bad, and the reality of preparedness. So, if you will, hit with what you know, what you can share with us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having the opportunity to share with you today. As you said, I'm the Section Chief for Preparedness under the Emergency Management Division of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security for the great state of Louisiana. And you're right, preparedness takes a faction of you just can't do it for your family or your neighborhood. You have to be looking at partners, both traditional and non-traditional, to make sure that we are covering on all aspects. I'm sure that through the news and the Weather Channel, I know the state of Louisiana has been highlighted throughout the last, let's say the last 15 months, because it seems like there's a magnet underneath my state that actually continues to draw these natural disasters. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the good, the bad, and the reality of preparedness. The good is, I'll just tell you, the state of Louisiana is no stranger to natural disasters. I think we have a great tips on what we need to do from a preparedness perspective as a part of planning, response, recovery, and even mitigation. And oftentimes people just think about preparedness as bottled water and fish, but it's when you get impacted like our state does, continuous after continuous times, we can't even get a break to even start doing recovery and mitigation. So it's important for us to really look at it. It's more, when we talk about the good, we know, thank God, that we have great weather analysis to kind of help us provide predictions as well as to be able to prepare for that. We've kind of gotten our communities and our citizens engaged, so they all know exactly what to put in their hurricane preparedness plan, as well as engaging their kids in that process. The state of Louisiana is very unique in a sense. I don't know, many people know the geography of it, but we have about 4.6 million people in population, and about half of those live in the coastal lines of southwest Louisiana. So if you think about that, you're looking at that from a perspective that our state really doesn't have a lot of elevation until you get past possibly Alexandria area. And even in Hurricane Laura that recently hit last August, even those warnings were still being signaled up to the state line of Arkansas. And so I guess it's kind of good that we all kind of have the same accent, Bill, because at least that way our partner states kind of understand what we're going through as well. So it's important when we talk about evacuation. In our mind, people have, I'm going to evacuate for a couple of days and I'm going to get back to my house. But in Katrina and actually Laura Delta, these folks were displaced for some time. So it's not enough just to tell their emergency documents or even making sure that they know where they are. They need to actually put them in either a scannable mode or in another safety deposit box or with a friend out where they're evacuating. So it's important for us to look at that, because when they register for FEMA, if they don't have insurance or they're underinsured or those things, the things that they need to kind of get additional recovery assistance is occupancy data, et cetera. And so those are some important things that we need to continue to put on to ahead. It's also important for us to make sure that we look at it's not good enough for us to talk about insurance. We need to know that insurance policy. I'll just tell you, it really kind of breaks my heart when you look at it. There are some people in our state says, well, my house is not in a flood zone, or it's in an X zone. I guess I was very fortunate because my husband has always been in emergency management. So we always maintain maximum limits on flood insurance. But flood insurance is a game changer because when you look at that, you're also looking at the cheapest way to kind of protect your home. And my boss tells my folks all the time that if your driver's license has LA on it, that means that you're in a flood zone. And he is right, not just in our community, but I take our partner state, our neighbor state in Texas. We're getting rainfalls that the amount of rain to be able to handle, the infrastructure just can't handle the rain. So flooding actually occurs. And so we need to be really thinking from a community perspective. The reality is that is our reality. It's not enough knowing where the weather's coming, how to be prepared for it, both on a local level, but even trying to understand watersheds and planning for the future. So that plays a part of it. I guess there's other things that I worry about relative to preparedness, and it's that vulnerable population. And I'm not just talking about populations with access and functional needs. I'm also talking about populations that also have limited resources or maybe living paycheck to paycheck. COVID hit the entire country worldwide very, very hard. Financially, there's a lot of communities that are still struggling and those families are struggling. But I worry about some of the mindset of some of in fact, even in Hurricane Laura, we had folks that were in their damaged dwelling because they were in a public housing authority and they didn't know that they had an option to evacuate. Because they waited, let's say they might have been on a waiting list forever, and they felt like if they left there, they would actually lose their housing. And so that's what really, really concerns me, because I think as a part of the reality is that we need to be looking at, we know the risk. We need to be planning for those vulnerabilities and what those gaps are. The biggest thing, of course, in any community that happens, especially with catastrophic damage, is when you're looking at that perspective, you're looking at a major shortage in housing. And if you have folks that have limited resources, they're not aware of other additional support that could help them get in more substantive housing. In fact, I know our state has gotten very fancy lately. We've actually have a damage.la.gov self-report survey that allows us to kind of capture real-time damages on individual homeowners' property. And I'll just tell you, but I have been on those field teams, Bill. And what's sad is that some of these folks are really, really strapped as a part of resiliency that, they still have tarps on their roofs from Gustav. And so when you look at that, we need to be working as planners to be able to address those needs, because those needs are always going to be there, whether they're displaced in another community temporarily, or they're going to be, or actually when they return home, they're still going to be building up. So who are those stakeholders that can help? And I would just tell you, it's been our plan as a part of GOHSEP to look for those non-traditional stakeholders and partners. I guess you could say, if you ever went to a Chinese restaurant, I know I'm Oriental, but I talk a little redneck. I tell everybody that I'm from a great town in Washington Parish called Bogalusa. My mother's from Thailand, and my dad is from Louisiana. So that gives me a great flavor of really understanding how rural America, what they need. And so when I look at that, we need to start building ambassadors, those folks that actually may be providing social services or human services to those citizens so they can be preparedness ambassadors too.
Can I ask you a quick question? And
absolutely.
That's been on my mind for a long time. It seems like we keep going to make it to where the government is the one that helps the people that can't really help themselves. And indeed, it sounds like and I've always thought we're not doing that right. We're not right, because these folks, no matter what you give them, they're already in a strapped spot. So you need to help the people that are already helping them and build.
Right.
Sounds like that's what you're doing. Is that?
Yeah. Well, that has been our, I guess you could say, we've been leaning forward on those strategies. And I'll just tell you, no better partner than a pastor in a local church. Because I'll just tell you, they can actually help invest most engagement for those, I guess, their congregation, in a sense, to make sure that they provide different supports for those individuals. So I would just say those church leaders. But the other thing is we have tried to look at our CERT program to kind of train youth perspectives too, and trying to build, I guess you could say, a mindset or a culture of preparedness, because it takes various different stakeholders, from the hospice work nurse to the person that actually may be servicing a client who gets either their Medicaid or their food stamps. We need to kind of make sure that all citizens are providing an ambassadorship, if you will, to help them be able to employ those preparedness skills and tips.
I know that during the pandemic, during the early parts of it, one of your staff, who I deal with frequently, Camilla, was immediately pushed over to where she could help with the feeding solutions. And I thought, yeah, at some point, preparedness has to turn into some sort of response or recovery, particularly when you are, as emergency management always is, short-staffed. So, yeah, you got to get to the people, and you got to recognize them for what they are.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, that has been probably the biggest push that we've been, because you see it in emergency management all the time. We know response, run. And when that's over, everybody wants to take a break, but there needs to be a better transition. So, my boss have really been looking at, I kind of serve as the future planning cell chief as a part of what are the current needs relative to pushing forward. Feeding is a big deal. I know, we usually tell citizens the first 72 on you, they know the amount of bottled water they need to have. And then it triggers our pod plan relative to ICE, MREs, TARPs, those kinds of things. But I'll just tell you, our nonprofits have been trying to really kind of run parallel with us, because, especially Louisiana, Bill, we like to eat. And so, MREs can last for a good bit, but then we have nonprofits that are going on relative to hot meals for folks. And so we really need to spend a little bit of time of making sure that the inventory is right, and that we right size the support for people to recover. And I do kind of worry. There are great factions within our state that I think are well organized. I worry about those populations because they just don't have the bandwidth to really sustain. So we've been really working on trying to build out our network relative to VOADs to try to serve in that capacity. But I'll just tell you, COVID, not just for our state, but other states, have definitely recognized different food deserts and other opportunities where we try to provide varied feeding. I don't know, in our state, a lot of the school systems networked with Baylor University and had meals to use delivered right there to the student's house that had limited contact. And so that protected both staff and families. But I think now that they have gotten really fancy with some of the pandemic electronic debit cards transfers that can help people get food that they directly needed access to. We've also kind of reached out to our ag extensions to help them do some PSAs, because, we've kind of gotten away from gardening. And I'll just tell you, I love me some homegrown tomatoes, but we need to kind of get back into trying to help folks sustain an inventory right there in their backyard, whether that's on their patio. And it could be a couple of, cucumbers and a couple of tomato plants, but trying to look at how we can extend some of those resources to help those families sustain their own inventory.
I believe you're right. And I believe that's going to be here for a while. And I can just say personally, and just for my friends and neighbors, it is now dotted with the many farms in the backyards. And collard greens, we're sharing tomatoes, we're sharing cucumbers. Soon we'll be sharing watermelons. And I believe we're just systemic. I believe are the product of having gone through the scary times of not knowing, is the line going to hold? Are we still going to have access to the supply chain? So, yeah, you're on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important because, we go back and we start talking that preparedness starts at home. And, when I'll just tell you, if anything good came out of the pandemic, it required us to be more creative about preparedness and planning strategies. I'll just tell you, even some one of my favorite new innovations has been the Walmart online grocery. It saves me time and convenience, but that really kind of has a tribute to how do we continue to provide support for essential functions and also goods to make sure people have what they need.
It is interesting because I noticed we did the Walmart line or the online shopping as well, and I've noticed when we go now, there are very few cars that are in the line. So I wonder if that one's going to change, or if that maybe it's in transition, maybe it's going to find a way to survive. But right now, it's looking like everybody would rather go in and pick their own food.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, our stays pretty steady, but the other thing is, and I've noticed a difference that it's made on my budgeting, because if I've already had and I've made the list of items, I'm not more frequently to stop, and it just helps you plan a little bit more effectively. I guess to you, the reality, I guess the ugly part that I'm concerned about relative to emergency management overall is I worry about our first responders, because we have been activated for for over a year now relative. And like I was sharing with you earlier, managing 6 different statewide recovery programs, and still COVID is still with us. It's not completely gone. And so we're still planning for any kind of resurgence if that happens. When you're constantly in a mode of recovery and response, and even that alignment together, I get concerned about really when we're talking about practicing self-care, being creative, thinking outside of the box, and how that plays a part of. So, we have definitely tried to reach out for different stress management. And I know with our crisis counseling part of that, it comes with a whole stress management. We've been promoting that on the local state level just to make sure that our folks are really taking care of themselves. And, we're so part of that. I know you're a little bit of a adrenaline junkie too, when you're actually supporting and providing public service. But at a point there, you're no good to anybody else if your cup is empty too. And so we want to make sure that gets said. And we also provide an opportunity to start building other future emergency managers based on the experience that we have. And so if that's outreach through internships, and GOHSEP was very fortunate this past year. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a board approved clinical social worker. So that stays on my mind a lot. And I think that this opportunity has provided me a lot of opportunities to enhance some of the planning and programming for GOHSEP. But I think as a part of that, our folks, our citizens, it's not their first rodeo. And oftentimes when you see a rainfall, not even an evacuation call, but even a rainfall, you see people going through different stages of trauma. And so I think it's important for us to continue to echo the needs of our citizens, because it's on multiple different levels. And especially during COVID, where some of our state agencies and their colleagues actually succumb to the virus and the impact of the virus, that stays with you as a part of what you do in your daily work. So I guess those are multiple different levels of preparedness activities, from workforce development to planning outside the box, and actually investing in other partnerships to help sustain it on multiple different levels.
I think that's the key. I think you've covered it, and I thank you for joining us today, Rubby. And I look forward to talking to you soon, because I don't think this conversation needs to end here. I think we've got another one. There were a couple of topics that we were discussing that I think need to be broken out a bit. So if you don't mind, you'll be joining us again in an episode soon.
So you made my dream come true, Bill. I have my own talk show and my own TV shows. You're doing a whole Netflix series with me. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share our experiences and hope that it helps other states and other local emergency managers get better at what they do.
Well, on behalf of Ruby Douglas today and the hashtag R6 Prepares podcast, thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.
That about does it for this episode. We'd like to thank Laura Brown from Arkansas Tech University's Emergency Management Program for her assistance editing this podcast. And we'd like you, the listener, to give us a like if you're so inclined and share us with somebody else that might want to help prepare their community. Until next time, take care of you and yours.